start talking too fast, please feel free to, say something or give me a look or anything, just so everyone's comfortable. All right. Subpoint 1 is the harms the School of the Americas is still exploring death squads. Wading 15. The School of the Americas was responsible for training over 64,000 South American soldiers, many of whom later became notorious torturers and murderers in death squads. The SOA was the biggest base for destabilization in Latin America. SOA relocated to Fort Benning, Georgia, and was renamed WINSEC in 2001, allowing for an apparent termination of the previous program of disassociation. In reality, however, WINSEC retained its SOA foundation. The U.S. Department of Defense has shielded the institute from criticism and outcry with regards to the school's historical link to human rights violations. Since 2000, renamed the SOA, other crimes linked to SOA graduates have come to light. Out of 25 Colombian graduates from 2001 to 2003, 12 had either been charged with a serious crime or commanded units whose members had reportedly committed multiple extrajudicial killings. The disassociation from the school's history under its original name, the SOA, is merely a premise for distancing the institution from the atrocities committed by its students and graduates. History, however, tells a different story. While WINSEC continues to emphasize what it describes as a commitment to human rights by citing a mere 8 hours of instruction on the subject, research such as the report on Colombia's extrajudicial killings reveals a reality that goes beyond the cosmetic reforms employed by the institution. Subpoint 2, inherency. Congress has drugged their feet on the closure, and the FBI has actively investigated the anti-SOA movement. McCoskey and Susser in 15. An American Civil Liberties Union released documents showing the Federal Bureau of Investigation initiated a counterterrorism investigation of SOA Watch, the human rights organization that coordinates anti-SOA activities. It also increased its surveillance to priority level after noting the rapid growth of the movement. More frustrating for the movement is recalculance at Congress. The continued unwillingness of congressional representatives to cut the school's funding has pushed activists to rethink their strategy. Though they did not abandon legislative efforts to close the school, movement leaders are now taking their message directly to a new generation of Latin American heads of state and requesting that these officials no longer send soldiers to train at the SOA/WINSEC. Thus the plan text. The United States federal government, through an act of Congress, should permanently suspend operation of WINSEC and its training network and prohibit the reestablishment of any school in its place. Implementation and enforcement will be through the Secretary of the Army. Subpoint 3 is solvency. Suspension of WINSEC closes its down and prevents future military education efforts. McGovern in 13. Suspend the authority for the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, the successor institution of the United States Army School of the Americas. The Secretary of the Army shall suspend operation of the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation and the authority of the Secretary of Defense to operate an education and training facility under Section 2166 of Title 10 United States Code is suspended. No training or education facility may be established in the Department of Defense for Latin American military personnel as a successor to the United States Army School of the Americas with the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. Subpoint 4 is that Southern Command's role includes training of regional military leaders at WINSEC 10 and 16. To enhance professional development of the region's military officers and senior enlisted leaders, U.S. Southern Command conducts and facilitates international military education and training, military defense exchanges, and security seminars. These programs help build accountable, transparent armed forces that can ensure the sustainability of U.S. security cooperation investments at defense institutes like the WINSEC. Advantage 1 is U.S. imperialism. Subpoint 1 is that closing WINSEC forces the U.S. to recognize accountability for imperial operations in Latin America. McCoskey and Susser in 15. And what can the struggle to close the institution tell us about the government's efforts to package U.S. imperialism for domestic and foreign consumption? The controversy represents a battle of collective memory, a struggle over how the legacy of the School of the Americas and the broader history of 20th century U.S. intervention in Latin America are understood in the United States. The U.S. has not experienced a period of national soul-searching about its involvement in the dirty wars. For U.S. policymakers, the concept of human rights and the theoretical and legal frameworks that associate would apply less to the United States than to others abroad. The controversy over the SOA and its clone, the WINSEC, is a struggle over beliefs about the intrinsic benevolence of U.S. power and the strength of those beliefs to remain unexamined and accepted as good. Subpoint 2 is that an ethic of accountability is the only way to solve U.S. imperialism. Roy in 06. How can this instrumentalized relationship between responsibility and empire be challenged and reformulated? Spybacks are just two ways, each with implications for philosophy of praxis. The first is the recasting responsibility and accountability. I can formalize responsibility in the following ways. All action undertaken in response to a call, response here not involves only respond to is give answer to, but the related situations of answering to is being and responsible for and being answerable for. A pedagogy of global responsibility cannot simply articulate the duty to intervene. It must also insist on accountability, on answering to those who are the objects of our responsibility. In the time of empire, it's not enough to be responsible, it's also necessary to be accountable. Subpoint 3. Although the school claims that they have reformed their curriculum, the fact that the school remains open sends a signal that the U.S. condones abuses in the name of imperialism. Koopman 8. The school continues to serve as a signal because they're being taught to militaries we know are likely to put those skills to horrific use. These days, most of the students of the Colombian Army, which has an appalling record of killing, the school continues to train individuals who have known human rights violations. There's been no accountability in the U.S. for those atrocities. Those who wrote and taught from these manuals face no disciplinary action. The failure of the U.S. Army to hold anyone accountable sends a signal to other militaries that violation of human rights is acceptable. And subpoint 4, U.S. imperialism leaves warfare into everyday life and props up culturally hegemonic systems of domination. Only by focusing on the structural violence of these systems can we reorient the political away from ingrained imperialism. Coloma 96. The omnipresence of militarism justifies the destruction of natural non-human and innocent communities during peacetime. Ethical approaches are not intended to the ways in which warfare are woven in the fabric of life into Christ-based politics and analysis. Christ-based politics distract attention from the need for sustained resistance to enmeshed systems of domination. The omnipresence of militarism allows the false belief that the absence of declared armed conflict is peace, and is particularly easy for those shaped by privilege. Resistance is immobilized when the real violence finally occurs. At that point, it's difficult not to respond in ways that make resistors drop all of their political priorities. Crisis-driven attention keeps resistors complacent. Seymour is embedded draws attention to the fact that horrific violence is happening all over. In subpoint 5, before they question my method of working within the state to reform it, research proves it's comparatively better. Grossberg 92. The left has to work against it within bureaucratic systems of government. The most effective struggle is accomplished by mobilizing popular pressure on governmental institutions. Institutions with immediate structures by which power is actively realized. It's often by directing opposition against specific institutions, power can be challenged. Subpoint 6. The state is the most influential actor in international politics. Individuals identify with the state and won't accept other actors. Curioma 2K. The state must continue to serve as the indispensable actor because the largest entity which people can identify themselves with continues to be the state. As far as can be seen in the future, there will be no change in this regard. In the case of private organizations, the state is the actor who must create the rules they advocate in areas such as human rights, humanitarian issues, and environment. Subpoint 7. Failure to engage with the state creates vacuums will be filled by violence elites. Cook in 92. Deconstruct without material realness creates political void in which the social real power deconstruct steps and steps from this power and this those dying, dehumanized and brutalized by violence. Power always seems a matter of general theoretical privileging. You can go ahead and cut that card. Privileging.
Is everyone ready for cross-ex?
1 second. Alright, let's do it.
What exactly is the biggest issue with WinSec itself? Is it the imperialism that occurs? Is it the human rights violation? What is the biggest salt area in this case?
Well, it's twofold. One, it's specifically the human rights abuses that are being taught at WinSec. But additionally, as my Koopman 08 evidence specifies, it is uniquely the symbol of the school itself as a mechanism of US imperialism that is key to solving back for this. So and that's partially why if you look to the 3 specific planks in my plan text, that it's not simply just closing down the school, it's also solving for the atrocious human rights training that we do in places like Honduras, and also removes the authority in order to hold these individuals accountable per my Roy 2006 evidence.
Okay. So, are you trying to solve for the imperialism, like calculus that the government uses to make decisions, or like what form of imperialism are we solving for here?
So I would say, again, I think that there's two different aspects to this. One, I think we directly solve what the Wadi 15 evidence calls the biggest base for destabilization in Latin America. Specifically, I think that is a unique form of imperialism that's enough for us to solve. But additionally, I would make an argument that when you look to the McCoskey and Sesser evidence, it literally indicates that the process of closing the school basically sort of forces policymakers to have what could be referred to as sort of a come to Jesus moment with the notion of US imperialism and how perhaps being able to retrospect and say, we may not have always done everything right, can create a broader ripple effect to be able to solve for this sort of overall ethic. And that's what the Cuomo evidence specifically indicates, that until we can engage and affirm this ethic of like anti-imperialism, we won't be able to reorient the system away from this sort of ingrained notion of militarism, imperialism that drives forms of structural violence.
Okay, so we're trying to solve for imperialism that drives structural violence.
That's one of the forms. Again, I think when you look to, it's kind of a double-sided deal, right? First, there's going to be the notion of just solving for the specific, what is the worst form of US imperialism in Latin America. But the second is more also kind of focusing on an internalized questioning of the ethic and the notion of US action and exceptionalism broad and domestically.
I have no more questions. I'm going to take a little bit of prep time. Give me half a second to set my timer. And start. documents used. Let me get this flashed over to you, make sure everything on there. Okay. So the order for my speech will be 2 off-case positions for sure against his case, and then possibly another one, depending on the time I have left. And then we're going to talk about his case in the order of solvency, and then his advantages. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Just please signpost if you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will let you know
See
if-
you around too.
Yep, I will let you know if I go for that extra position. And I will go probably a wee bit fast at times, so again, feel free to clear me. I don't mind at all. Is everyone ready? First is going to be the Southcom T. Subpoint A is the interpretation. U.S. Southern Command is the U.S. combatant command responsible for military activities in Latin America. John Pike, a leading expert on defense policy and director of globalsecurity.org, no date given. Southern Command is responsible for all U.S. military activities on the land masses of Central and South America, the Caribbean, and the surrounding waters of Mexico. Southcom is a joint command comprised of Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine elements. B is the violation. WINSEC is not a part of U.S. Southern Command, therefore the AF is not topical. Lieutenant General Douglas Frazier, congressional nomination questions for the position of the Commander of Southern Command, June 2nd, 2009. WINSEC does not fall under U.S. Southern Command's authority, but is one of many valuable tools to strengthen military-to-military relations within the region. So, to address this piece of evidence that tells you that it's specifically under U.S. Southern Command's jurisdiction, the card doesn't actually say that. What the card is actually telling you is that this is a tool that Southern Command uses to train individuals. They do not control WINSEC itself. Southern Command does not do the plan, therefore, as per the resolution of the United States federal government, should substantially reduce the role of U.S. Southern Command in Latin America. He is not topical. See are the standards or reasons to vote. First, prefer my evidence because Frazier is the chief authority on the matter. As a commander of U.S. Southern Command, he has the best understanding of the structure of WINSEC and military organizations. His expertise easily outweighs any random offer that the AF can pull out stating otherwise. Second is ground. All research in DA links into reductions of the role of Southern Command, not the general U.S. military. This is key to fairness because by allowing the AF to reduce the role of any random military organization, it creates an unreasonable research burden for the NEG. 3 is predictability. Even if their effects topical, there are an infinite number of advocacies that could relate in some way to U.S. Southern Command. The only way to ensure an educational and fair debate is to confine the AF advocacy to the text of the resolution, which serves as a limit test for all other T standards. D are voters, or reasons why you vote on this position first. First, it's according to the rules, the AF has to be topical. If you think they are untopical, you have to vote them down because the rules call upon you to do that. Second, fairness is a voter because it is key to preserving the debate's integrity as a competitive activity. As a brief explanation of what this position is. The idea is I have an expert telling us that WINSEC is not under U.S. Southern Command's direct authority. They don't have the ability to shut this down. And since that is what happens, there is no way that the 1AC, or the affirmative case rather, is topical. Therefore, you have to vote them down on face. Next, we're going to move into the theory level of this, which is basically competing interpretations. What I want him to do is read other definition that proves that he is topical. Without this, it completely justifies anybody coming in and saying, oh, we are Southern Command, we meet your definition, and requires you as the judge to force your perspective on the competitors, whereas the competing interpretation gives you an objective standard to weigh that. Next, let's move on to the Russian organized crime dissent. First is the uniqueness, or what's going on right now. Russian involvement in the region is on the rise because of lack of U.S. engagement. Derek DeLuca, American thinker, January 28, 2016. Russian influence is growing in Latin America. Russia's expansion into Latin America is due to negligence in the United States' own backyard. As the U.S. pulls economic and military resources out of the Americas, Putin sees the chance to once again take advantage of the American weakness abroad. Next is the link, or how the plan specifically triggers the dissent. U.S. involvement in the region is key to helping Colombia and other Latin American nations from caving to Russian influence. Lynette Lopez, senior finance correspondent at Business Insider Finance, March 27, 2015. As Russia's presence grows, its actions get bolder. The U.S. is not ready for incursion. Southern Command policy in the region has been to secure a perimeter around the United States and support allies such as Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Panama, and El Salvador as they try to rid their countries of organized crime. Because of the U.S. presence in countries abutting Russia, Russia may be looking to do the same in our region. With Russia's Latin American resurgency, this isn't enough. Our friends across the region are committing to win back their streaks from gangs and drug traffickers, but they are frustrated by the low prioritization of Latin America on our national agendas. Next is the internal link, or how we're going to get from plan to the impact itself. First, Russian influence in the region causes Russian-supported crime and corruption. Lynette Lopez previously cited. Where Russia goes, Russian organized crime follows. Maduro has kept on carrying the mixing criminal activity with politics. The Maduro administration is the central component to a multi-state ongoing criminal enterprise carried out with a growing Russian presence whose primary strategic objective is to cling to power by whatever means necessary and harm the United States and its allies. 2. Russian organized crime prevents long-term economic development. Bruce Bagley, PhD in political science. His research interests are in U.S.-Latin American relations with an emphasis on drug trafficking and security issues. November 15, 2002. The Russian preferred tactics of bribery, blackmail, and intimidation tend to exercise corrosive pressures on key public and private sector institutions, undermining individual states' abilities to preserve the stable economic and social environment, effective law enforcement capability, and level playing field required to promote legal business activity and attract foreign investment, essential to long-term economic growth. Many officials have proven susceptible to such indictments in countries throughout the region. The Russian mafia's expanding presence in Latin America does not currently constitute a direct threat to the United States. It does, however, constitute to the region's entire growing economic, social, political turmoil and insecurity, and thus poses a major threat to economic growth, effective democratic governance, and long-run regime stability throughout the hemisphere. Finally, our impact, or what happens when you pass the plan. Economic turmoil has adverse effect on the mental health of adolescents and young girls. From Shapervalou and Jones in 2013. Economic crises have adverse effect on mental health with increases level of stress and depression at a time when funding for mental health services is being cut. Evidence from economic crises in Latin America suggests that all people experience increased levels of stress and fear. Mental health disorders are more common than physical health in 12 to 24-year-olds, with serious long-term outcomes as a result of this crisis. They are more exposed to stressful events at home and wider in their community, and early adolescent girls are more affected by parental mood and maternal frustration, and their personal and social development can suffer, as girls often take over domestic responsibilities and spend more time within the household and are exposed to domestic violence with fewer opportunities through paid work and improve their self-perception and confidence. I won't read the third one. So basically, as a brief underview of this, the idea is whenever you pass the 1AC, we see that enough of a decrease to allow Russian to continue to move in. And when my evidence tells you that Russians, when they move in, have organized crime move in with them, that means you're never going to be voting for this, because that means there's an increase in oppression, specifically with young girls and their continued repression. So you're never going to vote on that. Next, let's move on to his solvency. According to his own solvency, from his own solvency, a quote, it says, not later than 30 days from the completion of this investigation, the commission shall report to Congress and all of this. So this only closes WINSEC for 30 days as per his own solvency evidence. And second, the plan never solves for the root causes of militarization and other militarization abroad, such as South Korea.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about your topicality. First off, on your violation level, specifically, okay, so Lieutenant General Douglas Frazier, was he actually ever promoted to the command of Southern Command?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe the shell said that. I apologize if it did.
No.
He was
No.
the person who was in consideration for it.
Sure, but this was 7 years ago, correct?
Sure, but when
Okay,
was
so
around.
why wouldn't the Admiral Tidd evidence I read out of the 1AC when Tidd literally says we train people at WINSEC not meet your interpretation of Southern Command?
I address that when I specifically talk about in the violation. I say that it implies that it's a tool that we use, that they send people there to train. It's not that they're over that, it's just, here's a tool we're using. WINSEC is a part. It's like, you don't say an individual, like a carpenter is working with the wood and his tools are like a carpenter themselves. That makes sense. The tool, WINSEC.
But wouldn't the carpenter, I really don't want to go down this metaphor route, but isn't
That's
the
fine.
Carpenter in command of the wood? Isn't that the point of being a carpenter? So you control the wood to shape it and make it what you need for your task?
Maybe that.
If we're working under your metaphor for this, wouldn't
this
that
is
still
just
be topical?
a tool in the toolbox. It's not actually under Southern Command. It's a tool that is used by Southern Command, sure.
What tool
but
would it
they
be?
don't control Southern Command as a whole.
What tool would it be? Are you thinking like an electric screwdriver or like a...
Forget the metaphor. You know what I'm saying. It's just a tool that we're using.
Sure.
That Southern Command uses.
Cool.
It's not Southern Command itself.
On the predictability standard,
For sure.
for action debate. Let's talk about the Russian organized crime dissad. Has Russia done anything more in Latin America since January 28th, 2016?
I mean, like, what are you asking?
Like, I'm just like, how is your uniqueness still true when it's over a year old? Like, if it's already on the rise, like, how has it not triggered your impacts? Like, how do I uniquely make Russian organized crime in Latin America
So if you
worse?
look to like the story of the disadvantage, it specifically talks about how like the reason that like Russia hasn't done this and we haven't triggered the impacts is because the U.S. is barely keeping the pilot light of engagement on, and that comes from the first piece of Lopez evidence, and also like Putin's still in power. Like Russian policy is not going to super change overnight because as long as Putin is in policy.
Okay, so then how does, okay, all right. On your Russian organized crime prevents long-term economic development,
Yeah.
so like how much long-term economic development has it stopped since 2002 when your card was written predicting this?
So it basically is like an outline of what happens when Russian organized crime.
Sure, but like what's actually happened in the last 15 years? Like where do you actually read that this is, like empirically this is gonna happen, not just like this did happen in the early 2000s?
It says specifically within there that empirically this does happen, that the Russians do these tactics and cause those problems to happen.
All right, take a breath. We're up to 255 left. I'm gonna just put this on the flash drive. Order will be the T, the dissad, then case. Catch. Good catch.
Good throw.
All right. Is everybody ready? First on the topicality is going to be an I meet. WinSec is directly under Southern Command. You can extend across the TID 2016 evidence that I read out of the 1AC, specifically where Admiral Tidd, the current commander of Southern Command, specifically says, we train individuals at WinSec. Doesn't say we may train individuals, doesn't say that we may keep it as a tool in our toolbox to extend the metaphor, but that we legitimately do. That's probably going to be enough of an I meet at the point in which my interpretation comes from the current commander of Southern Command and is 6 years newer than his interpretation that says it's not, probably means that you're going to be preferring my interpretation. But if you don't, we'll continue. The second I meet is that I have a flow chart from the Pentagon briefly showing that WinSec and Southern and TRADCOM are under U.S. Army South, under SOUTHCOM. I encourage you to take a look at this after the round if you don't think I'm topical. That's from the U.S. Army South in 15. Third I meet is from Watson 10. WinSec has direct responsibility to Southern Command to accomplish education personnel from the armed forces throughout the region. 3 is going to be the counter-interpretation. Southern Command's role includes education, DoD in 16. Southern Command works with allies in the region to deliver advice, education, and assistance. Other priorities are countering transnational organized crime, counterterrorism, drug interdiction, building partner capacity response, and maintaining operations. 4 is the I meet. The plan reduces Southern Command's education through WinSec. 5 are the reasons to prefer. 8 is the intent to define. My interpretation comes from a PhD dissertation. Prefer this definition because it comes from a source that's intending to define from a contextualized perspective. My interpretation education, my needs and interps are better, key to better education because they're based on official statements from the resolutional actor in forms of context. B is the reasonability decision rule. This means that if you find that I'm being reasonable and I'm making at least an attempt to be topical, you don't vote me down. If the affirmatives mean a reasonable interpretation of the topic and making a reasonable attempt to limit the role of Southern Command in Latin America, you don't vote me down. Its answer is predictability arguments. I'm running something that restricts U.S. training of Latin American militaries. Additionally, predictability changes round and round depending on what they want to limit out, but reasonability stays stable. Always prefer reasonability. The topic super unwieldy. If I have some hard insolvency, I should be considered topical. But additionally, to answer their predictability standards, disclosure and video disclosure, check back. My affirmative in multiple forms is available on the NFLD case list. There's also over I believe 25 videos of me running this specific app in round, publicly available on YouTube, which have been shared on the NFALD Facebook page, which probably means his predictability arguments kind of fall flat when he literally could have watched my entire app and all my answers. On the voters, fairness turn. The topicality is another instance of imperialists dictating what is fair, like the way that U.S. imperialism set up democratic elections in Latin American countries and overthrew governments that were not favorable to U.S. interests. The T only serves to prop up and defend the interests of the imperialists. The affirmative is key to deconstructing the system. This turns the fairness impacts. The T precludes discussion of the unfairness of the system. If I win that I create better fairness, I win the position, I win the debate. B is NFALD rules don't tell you how to punish me if I'm not topical. Don't let them get away with lazy arguments like the rules. Let's go to the Russian dissad. First of all, super non-unique. Russia has already expanded in the region and opened a training facility. Should have triggered your impacts. DeLuca, January 28. Putin has established strong relations with the nation of Bolivian Alliance for the Peoples of America. The organization was created in opposition to the United States-backed free trade area for the Americas, which has been seen by many Latin American Caribbean countries as a form of American imperialism. The Russians send large quantities of weapons to Bolivian Alliance nations. Russia shouldered more than 3,000 surface-to-air missiles to Latin American countries. Argentina's former president, Cristina Kirchner, was one of the few world leaders to support Russia's aggression in Crimea. Russia has helped Argentina create a third reactor as part of a nuclear power plant. Putin has forgiven Cuba Soviet-era debt and performed naval drills with Venezuela and Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the Russians have established a counter-narcotics training center that some observers say could eventually rival the United States' long-standing commitment to anti-drug operations in the region. Russia sold nearly $14.5 billion worth of weapons to the region between 2001 and 2013. Literally, Russia has already built a similar training facility in Latin America, and we have not seen the impacts of the disadvantage. Means literally, my app doesn't make this uniquely any worse, which means you have no justification to vote for the affirmative. But additionally, extend the Wadi 15 evidence where I say the SOA was the biggest base for destabilization in Latin America. Closing SOA/WINSEC is key to stabilization of Latin America, which solves the impacts of the structural violence of the DISAD. The app turns and outweighs the DISAD. But second, Russian engagement is good for Latin America. Ellis, January 5th. Russia was forgiving 9% of the $35 billion outstanding debt that Cuba had run up. Putin participated in the annual BRICS summit in Fortaleza, where he secures the organization's neutrality and Russian activities in Ukraine. Russia would provide security for the future Nicaragua Canal. Russia announced a $520 million sale of 24 Mi-171 transport helicopters to Karub to be accomplished by the construction of a maintenance facility. Got the card there, but additionally, Russia threats of accidents, nuclear use, and disintegration are falsely constructed to justify imperialist expansion. This is an independent critique of the negative political philosophy from Rommel and Sikorsky in 2001. 10 years after the Cold War, mutual hopes that a comprehensive partnership plays containment as the major organizing theme in U.S.-Russian relations have not been realized. The evil Russia view holds that the Russian courtship of Cuba, Iran, Iraq, and North Korea is a deliberate effort to undermine U.S. influence in the world and recreate the Soviet Empire. Analysts embracing this view take less notice of Russia's diminished capacities and ambitious rhetoric by Russian politicians. The evil Russia view risks inflating the threat and making the myth of an evil Russia a self-fulfilling prophecy. Undoubtedly, Russia could inflict unacceptable damage on the U.S., but fear of Russian nuclear weapons should not be the driving element in the relationship. The hostility and ideological difference that divided the superpowers during the Cold War are gone. The prospect of Russia consolidating and rebuilding itself under a militarist, authoritative national regime is remote. Go to case. Fundamentally, his main answer on case was not later than 30 days. As the app, I don't have to do specifically what my solvency card says. You only have to, my only advocacy is that of the plan text in and of itself. Nothing more, nothing less. My plan text is inspired by McGovern 13, which is why I read that card, but I'm not specifically held to the tenets of every aspect of that card. But additionally, you can extend the Koopman, the Roy, and the McCloskey and Susser evidence that literally gives me solvency. He doesn't answer that argument, which means I get to have solvency for some imperialism in Latin America, which is going to outweigh specifically with the offensive turns on the DISAD.
talking about will be topicality, disadvantage, and then case. So just the same orders we've been going all the time.
Is there any new F?
No.
Okay.
Won't
For sure.
add anything. Is everyone there? And also I'll be telling you voters as we go along, or reasons to vote for me. Good?
I'm good.
Alright. On the topicality, the first thing he gets up here and brings you is that his TID evidence says that WinSec is under Southern Command. But however, again, I implore you to look at the way that TID says this. The way that he says it is we send people to WinSec. And then I have my evidence, which tells you that it's just a tool in the toolbox of Southern Command. It is not Southern Command itself that is happening. He's gonna get up here and show you this chart, which it's a really cool chart. It does indeed say that it has WinSec under Army South. But however, if you look to the little grid, it has red dotted lines. According to the key, the red dotted lines means supporting. So even this tells you that it's not under US Southern Command, it is supported by. That means that you can't shut it down, and he is blatantly untopical. Let's address more of his. All of his educational arguments, none of them mention WinSec by name ever. All of these arguments go out the window when not only does his own piece of evidence from the Army, Admiral, and then his own piece of evidence, Kurt Tidd, specifically points out how it is just a tool in the toolbox. They send people there. All of this shows that it is untopical. It does not matter what abuse has occurred or has not occurred, he's untopical. And as per rules and stock issues of the debate, he has to be topical. Otherwise, you have to vote him down on the topicality. So, addressing both of those, he does not mention, again, he does not mention Southern Command by name, or WinSec by name in any of his pieces of evidence. It never tells you throughout any of these that WinSec is directly under US Southern Command's role or area of responsibility. And whereas I presented to you not only his own piece of evidence, which points out that it's supporting, not underneath, and his TID evidence, which tells you that we're just sending people there, and then my piece of evidence, which tells you it's just a tool in the toolbox. All of these point to the fact that he is blatantly untopical. Let's move on down to his reasons to prefer. Intent to define. So just because the admiral in mind, or the lieutenant admiral in mind, did not mention this is the definition of Southern Command, that does not mean that you reject the definition of him telling you that WinSec is not a part of Southern Command. It's not a reason to prefer him nor to prefer me. It's just that my evidence specifically calls out WinSec and Southern Command as not being under the same umbrella. So at the end of the day, you will always be preferring my evidence. Next, on to reasonability. He completely mishandles my reasonability claim when he says that reasonability is constant and reasonability is good. But the fact is, reasonability depends on the eye of the beholder. You will always be preferring the definitions that are provided within round. Don't think about reasonability, due to the fact that reasonability justifies every individual judge to make a decision for us in this round and destroy the competitive equity that comes within this round. Next, onto the voting level. He says that fairness is a term because the topicality is another instance of the imperialist dictating what is fair. The idea behind topicality is to make sure that we can have a good debate round. It's not about imperialism. I am not the US federal government. I am the negative position, making sure that we are actually debating the topic, which WinSec is not. So this term really doesn't function. And second, the rules tell you that you should vote them down. Like stock issues tell you that you should vote them down because topicality is important. Like common sense tells you that you will vote them down on topicality. So again, just as a brief clarification on what we're talking about with the T, my interpretation tells you that that Southcom is responsible for military activities in Latin America. Then my violation from Douglas Fraser, Lieutenant General Douglas Fraser, tells you that WinSec does not fall under US Southern Command, and he has not presented any evidence to tell you that it does. And in fact, the only piece of evidence he presents that says WinSec by name is only telling you that the US Army South supports WinSec and is not directly over or controlling WinSec. So that means you vote him down on this topicality. This is the easiest place for you to vote for the fairness or for for the evidence, for the ground, and predictability. Just because it's on the wiki doesn't mean that it's super predictable, and disclosure doesn't check back for that. Even if you are untopical, it doesn't matter if you tell me 1 billion times your plan beforehand. The fact is, if you're untopical, you deserve to be voted down on topicality. Next, moving on to the voters. Again, the rules tell you that you vote them down on face if they are untopical. Fairness as voter, because it's key to preserving debates as a competitive activity, and then counter interpretations I've already mentioned. So now let's go on to the disad. The disad itself is very important because Justin doesn't really seem to be understanding the base concept of this. The base concept is right now we are barely able to keep the Russians from triggering our impacts. This answers the non-unique argument he brings up. When the Russians trigger the impact, whenever the Russians move in, Russian organized crime inherently follows. And whenever that happens, it destabilizes the state. All of his turns and argumentation about how Russia is good and all of this go completely out the window whenever you consider that my authors tell you that when Russians move in, their organized crime is what follows, and that their organized crime debilitates the state and destroys it. And also, as far as this false construction to justify imperialism, no, it's not. Like, this is empirically in other countries. This is what has happened. This is a policy expert telling you that when we look in the past, this is what has happened. And the disadvantage and the impact of the oppression of women and little girls in Latin America is going to be the other place for you to vote in this round. Thank you.
Order's going to be the T and then the disad. Is everybody ready? It's going to be a really easy ballot for the affirmative when my opponent specifically misrepresents what the TID evidence says. I want you to take you can call for the card, the TID evidence at the end of the round and read it. It literally says that we train soldiers at WinSec, not that we send them, not that we take them there, literally that we train them at WinSec. That's like literally the way my opponent is spinning this card is completely false and not at all what Admiral Tidd is actually saying. Probably means it's enough of a justification to buy my I need. But additionally, on response to the flowchart, he specifically indicates that it's simply supporting, but that still jives, particularly with the Watson 10 evidence and the TID 16 evidence, that literally indicates that it is still, as a supporting role, it is still under some control of Army South, which is under Southern Command. Probably means that that's going to be enough to at least give me a reasonable attempt at being topical, which is going to be enough to vote for me. But additionally, he doesn't answer my Watson 10 I need. That literally, it comes from a PhD in international relations from the University of Notre Dame that literally does this sort of holistic view of the combatant commands and their structure. And Watson in 10 literally concludes that WinSec has direct responsibility to Southern Command. At the point in which he doesn't answer a piece of evidence that says WINSEC has direct responsibility to Southern Command, that's probably going to be enough of a justification to be able to vote for the affirmative. But additionally, on the counterinterpretation, like, he doesn't really do enough work to refute it. Specifically, I would indicate that because of the TID 16 evidence that says that they train people at WINSEC, that that's going to be enough to meet that interpretation. I also indicate that my interpretation, he doesn't really respond to the my particular arguments about why you should prefer my interpretation, which means you're probably going to be able to at least give me some leeway on it. But let's talk about the reasonability argument, because I really think you can vote him here. He says that the fact is reasonability depends upon the eye of the beholder, but he mishandles the way I frame reasonability. I give you a specific framework on how to evaluate it, particularly out of the 1AR. I say that if I'm making any reasonable attempt to limit the role of Southern Command in Latin America, specifically I say that I'm running something that restricts U.S. training of Latin American militaries. I don't just say, judge, arbitrarily define what is reasonable. If I'm meeting these reasonable parameters of the topic, I should be considered topical. He doesn't answer that sort of reasonability framework that I give you. It means that these arguments just simply don't function. But additionally, I want you to, I don't even need to win the fairness turns. Like, fundamentally, I still think in a world, I think it's an attempt to silence the discussion of imperialism, but we'll go to the dissad. Look, he fundamentally mishandles it. You need to pull across my card from January 28th this year. That literally indicates that Russia has spent $14.5 billion in weapons and have already opened a competitive training facility. Like, literally, I don't know what more specifically Russia could do to trigger the impacts. What that means is his impacts aren't going to happen. But additionally, he does not answer the turns effectively. One, my first turn says that SOA was the biggest base for destabilization, means I solved the root cause of the impacts. But also the last card indicates how all the good things Russia did doesn't respond to the words, means you vote now.
Strong battle, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Tell me the resolution.
United States federal government